right, everybody. So today on the podcast, we have a new guest, Andrew Coates. How we doing, man?
Good. You're the only scheduled thing I have today, which is very rare. So I'm enjoying my
Okay,
coffee, looking forward to this. Then I got lots of work to do, but this is the only scheduled thing.
perfect, perfect. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of nice. It's kind of how my Fridays are generally. There's like a few scheduled things, and I'm working most of the day, but I try to keep it open just to kind of like I have like admin work and like some kind of like behind the scenes stuff in my company. So it's a good time to do it.
Yeah. Not
Cool.
dissimilar.
No,
Yeah.
no. So as I've mentioned before, with a new guest here, we do a donation to a charity, and anybody who's listened to the podcast for a while knows that I'm big on Operation Smile and St. Jude's. So we are going to donate to St. Jude's today, and anybody who's interested in that, I'm going to have a link down below. Obviously, I'm sure they very much appreciate any sort of donation, so we will have that link below. And Andrew, so we actually connected very briefly, I think in 2020. I just saw like on our DMs, it was like a very short interaction where you, I believe, saw the podcast through Brandon DeCruz, who was one of my early
Mm,
guests, and I've known him for years
mm.
now. And then that was just kind of it. Obviously with the nature of Instagram and podcasts, you might connect with somebody, for one conversation, then you don't hear from them again. And then I don't actually know how I came across you again, other than obviously just seeing random posts.
If
Yeah.
you if you found me in 2020, I was getting a lot of social media push from Dr. Mike Isertel, who's a friend, and I'm
Okay.
now years later sponsored by RP Strength.
Okay.
But he just kept taking my posts, sharing them on his wall, and drove a lot of like hundreds, if not, well, actually drove thousands of followers my way across 2020. Just happened to like my media. I've known him since 2017. Great stuff. And it's funny when it comes to like social media growth and people talk about all these things, like just going and meeting and connecting with people and treating the industry leaders like normal people. And it's not just the industry leaders, because yes, they can have an outsized influence in theory, but most of the great opportunities that have come in my career are from meeting and befriending people who are on the same part of the journey as I have had been at that time. And we've kind of grown together and people mutually support. And if you're doing good things, people will, it'll get their attention. And so a lot of the people who found me in 2020 were finding me through, Dr. Mike Isertel or Jordan Syatt as well. And there's a few
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Mike, I had met maybe back in 2019, I want to say. He'd been on the podcast a couple of times. And that was one of the things I had noticed is that we had a ton of mutual contacts, which you find like you might see somebody who you've never spoken to directly, but then you realize, oh, like you have a lot of similar friends and contacts and whatnot. So that was kind of what I wanted to get you on for too. Is like, okay, so obviously we have to have, some similarities there if we have this many mutual contacts between Mike and Brian and a lot of these other people. So my thought was when we had talked about the podcast, you and I actually started our podcast at a very similar time. So you want to tell people
Mm.
about your podcast a little bit and getting started with that?
It was a happy accident. So in starting in and around, I think it was 2017, I assume yours is the same. It was a very different podcast climate.
Yeah.
Yes, we weren't the earliest adopters. It wasn't like, Tim Ferriss or Rogan are the ones that went on to the huge things, but there were nowhere near as many fitness podcasts. Now it does feel like everybody has them. I think it still could be a very useful thing if you do it well. It's also a bit of a winner take most.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
bigger ones tend to disproportionately do well. But a friend of mine, I'd met him several months earlier. He likes all my media. He wanted to start a podcast, asked me to do one with him. His name is Dean Guido, still a great friend of mine to this day. And I'm like, okay, sure, let's do it. And then Mike Isertel was one of our first 10 guests. We had Sohee Lee as one of the first 10, and
Mhm.
just a
Yeah.
bunch of other big figures. And that sort of mushroom clouded things early because, again, there weren't as many. So people rushed in. We got huge downloads pretty quick. And we just kept going. And we just recorded reliably weekly for years. And he had to bow out at about episode 150 because he decided he wanted to raise a family, but he was insistent I keep going. Renamed it, rebranded a little bit, kept going for a really long time. And for a long time, it was geared towards career development for fitness professionals, which
Mhm.
is great. It mirrored my journey because I get to have conversations from really smart people in the industry that you get an hour to learn from and develop relationships with. And one of those things along the way, because I was also writing for my website, I had Danny Schugert, who's one of the editors at T Nation, on. I've been reading T
Mhm.
Nation for many years, and because I was already writing for my website, Danny turned around and dug into my media, and she invited me to come write for T Nation back in 2018.
Okay.
And so I've been
Yeah.
writing for them ever since. And that opened the doors to more and more things. And that was the first step in writing for many of the well-known fitness publications across the industry, which and I love writing. Behind me, if anybody's watching a video on this, there's a lot of my books on writing. I study it aggressively because I love it. But the podcast is really fulfilling. But after a while, I really knew that, okay, there's incongruence between the topics and subject and who I'm speaking to and who I actually serve because I'm not a business mentor coach. I work with the end user, general population, some older adults, some young athletes, and that's what I love. And I wanted the podcast to be a vehicle that served those people. So I actually put on hiatus for a while. There's a lot of travel, a lot of public speaking, and it was just too much to juggle all on my own. Then I talked to a good friend of mine. His name's Chris Little, and he does excellent work behind the scenes on podcast production. And we spitballed some ideas, new graphic, just wanted to represent it and relaunched it with bringing friends of mine on and we had conversations about it was almost like topic-based episodes geared towards more of the general population. And the funny thing happened, the coaches love it. They're soaking it up. So then there's just this big explosion with it. It's been growing. It's been growing. I've had big industry guests. Dr. Mike Israel came back. I've had Brad Schoenfeld on recently. Stan Efferding
Yeah,
is
that's
just
what I
coming
saw.
up as a
Right.
time of recording, and it goes on and on from there. And I decided to start releasing 2 a week. And because Chris does all this back end stuff, he uploads everything. We now have it up on YouTube. He does graphics for it, pulls quotes out of it, etc. Then all I have to do is schedule the guests, script and plan everything, record it, send everything to him, and then it's good to go, which removes the part I didn't enjoy about it, right?
Sure.
And it freed up my bandwidth. And between that and I recently hired a meal prep service, which became a sponsor. So now I have meals sent to me, so I have less time cooking and shopping, which gets me more time. So I've offloaded a handful of time consuming things that are low value added because I now have the resources to do it. And I'm full-time coach in person. I still have I have online programs, but I've never let go of that in-person coaching, which I love, which leaves me in a position to be able to do these other things, which has created more time to do more fulfilling things. And it's a positive cycle.
I'll have to talk to you more about either off air or later on about the
Mm.
meal prep service because that's something like as I've gotten busier and things have grown, I do try and I'm not great at this, but I try to delegate other tasks that could be done by somebody else. And obviously there's things like you could just think of silly examples like lawn maintenance or whatever like that. But even just like within daily life that like
Oh,
I would just prefer not to do. And the
well,
meals, man, they take a long time.
Well, honestly, anybody listening might get some value out of this. So there's certain narratives, just like you think, well, meal prep would be expensive. Well, you factor in, first of all, there's a cost of groceries. Okay. And then there's a surcharge for having a meal sent to you. You're worried about the food quality. There are incredible meal prep services, mine, and shout out to my sponsor. I doubt most of the listeners are in my geographic area, but they're called Just Bite Me Meals. I know the owner, Dan. He's great. I've known him for years. They're very successful. And the food is great. And it's also, the macros are listed on it. The portions are good. And what I noticed is the portions were slightly smaller than what I'm normally cooking for myself, which was a really convenient way for me to auto regulate down the calories I was consuming, which helped me get just a little bit leaner and I feel really good. I don't feel as heavy. But if you also factor in what are the other costs, so there's the time to drive to the grocery store, Costco. I usually did a Costco trip every week. Now it's cut down to every 2 weeks. I still do a little bit of cooking for myself just to try to keep that in there. But the time savings, actually, well, first of all, let's go with cost. I mean, there's also the gas to drive to and from the grocery store and whatever trips that is. There's the time that all takes. But then there's the time savings on cooking the meals. And there were evenings, the real catalyst was there were evenings where I would be done, maybe like my last client, 8 o'clock. I've got an 8 a.m. client. So I'm up at 7:30 to roll out of bed to train that client in my home. And I want to go to the gym. And so I try to get to bed around 11:30. And so I've got 3.5 hours to drive to the gym, to work out. And I'm not one of these 45-minute workout people. I don't like rushing the workouts. I like having my time. Maybe I want to do a bit of
Yeah,
cardio. And
same.
then I got to come back. And while I would meal prep and batch prep food, there were nights where, well, that's the night I'm supposed to cook. And I've got a 3.5 hour window to drive to the gym and back, right? And that's probably a 2 hour turnaround time. I need to cook, I need to eat. And quite frankly, it doesn't work really well to just then jump in bed. I may also have a little bit of online work to do. And it
Sure.
just didn't fit. So being able to get back from the gym, pop something in the microwave, which was as good. And here's another thing. I'm a Spartan cook, right? I'm not gourmet, deluxe chef, whatever. I've got some things I really like, but keep it simple. and I get more variety of meals that I enjoy. And I've just been and it's been so freeing of mental and physical energy to have this service there. And yes, there's a surcharge. Okay. And I mean, I'm sponsored. So guess what? It worked out way better for me anyway. Right. But for the average person, now let's also look at this as like the average person is probably not flawlessly cooking just home cooked, nourishing meals. The occasional person is busy people. What are they doing? Instead of the meal prep, it's your delivery services, your DoorDashes, your Uber Eats, or whatever version of it is. And there's a massive surcharge on that. And then those people are impulsively, at the end of the day, often tired, usually going for higher calorie options versus healthy options, right? Moderate
Sure. And I
calorie, high
do
protein
think that
options.
like probably the average person, I mean, again, I don't know. I would think that the average person listening here is doing less of like the DoorDash and everything. Like I actually do home cook 95% of my meals. But again, that's where the time comes in. I don't know if you've ever done any like extended fasts. I've done a couple of 3-day fasts for different reasons.
No.
But I will tell you, that is when it's kind of, I just was talking with, if you know, Jeffrey Schofield, he was just on the podcast. We were talking about this where he had done like a 4-day fast. And it's just like the realization at that time when you're like, wow, there is so much time I have saved now. Not that I'm telling people to do these long fasts, but just that when you do that, you realize how much time can go into prepping and obviously buying and cooking food and eating the food. The whole thing could be a couple hours every day. So anyway, yeah, it's something that I'm looking into. But yeah, I'll be interested to talk to you more off air as well.
I found it's a big time saver, and fundamentally, the surcharge, when you add everything together, is not nearly as much as you think relative to the alternative, which is what we're already doing.
Yeah,
So
right, right, right.
I found it's been
Um,
amazing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I wanted to ask you a little about the podcast itself. So you were talking about some of these the guests, and I think we've also just had a lot of mutual guests over the years.
Mm.
It is interesting, and I agree with you. Like when I got into it, it was like 2017. I started thinking about it. 2018 is when I actually, started it, and I just had no idea how saturated it was, right? Like, I mean, literally everybody. Now, but what I did find, and maybe you found this as well, was initially there was almost, I don't want to say a competition standpoint, but I would hear like this person's going to start a podcast and this person's going to start a podcast. And I was like almost worried about it in a sense. And over time, I just realized the vast, vast majority of these people either one, never start it, or two, they get like 5, 10, maybe 20 episodes in, and then it just falls off. I mean, very few people have been doing this for 7, 8 years. And of course, you have like the Rogans who are like, 15 years or whatever it is. But I imagine that you've seen similar where people that yes, everybody has one, but they don't do it for a long time.
I understand the fears around saturation. I do. And we hear the same thing. I mean, obviously I'm a personal trainer, right? So you hear that in the industry. But again, you also get the statistics of how many trainers enter and leave, which is a perfect proxy for the number of people who start a
Mhm.
podcast and don't continue past 10 episodes. So I've still always been wired to focus on myself and what I'm doing. That's just permeates my life and my ethos, but also to view it through an abundant lens. Because I had a second podcast for a while related to a program that I do with a co-host. So I have been the host of over 420 episodes. I have
Oh
been
wow.
a guest on, I would estimate somewhere in the range of 175 to 200 podcasts in the last 4 or 5 years. So disproportionately, other people have platformed me, which has led people to my door, which I've had plenty of clients who have told me, hey, I heard you on such and such a podcast.
Sure.
So, I mean, that takes a leap of faith, but it's been rewarded. And it's like writing articles that mention other people. It's like hosting a conference that other speakers speak at. It's every step of the way. There are the publications I write for. I'm picky and I gatekeep. It's the only thing I gatekeep because I understand my editors and what they need because everybody wants to get in with a muscle and fitness or a men's health or a T Nation. So I gatekeep my editors true. But when I have friends in the industry who I feel like are really aligned and would be of value to that publication, because I work full time in person, I could never deliver the volume of written articles at the quality I want that my publications were hoping for. So one of the ways that everybody won is if I create an introduction with a friend who I thought, hey, this person would be a really great fit here. It serves my editor. It's a really cool honor for my friend. They dive in, everybody wins. And I've never felt like, wow, this is going to take away opportunities for me. And what ended up happening was for it enhanced my relationship with all my editors because I'm dropping carefully chosen, qualified people to be contributors that help them out. Everybody won. And I don't know where this started. I feel like it was always there, but we also tend to post rationalize our narratives and belief systems based
Sure.
on, that it's connecting the dots backwards from a successful story, right? Survivorship bias, pick your way of explaining it. But I feel like it's always been how I've thought about things, and I've been rewarded tenfold for everything I've ever been able to quote give into the industry or to people. I've been rewarded back 10 times.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, and it's funny because I remember when getting into it, I used to think that if you just had this one guest on, like that would be like a huge deal, right? And the reality is, I mean, I could probably literally have like Dwayne The Rock Johnson on tomorrow, and unless he himself promoted it, it might get triple the views I'd normally get, but it wouldn't be like this huge
Mm.
thing. And now this is beginning, and you see this, you see people who have somebody on, even like numerous times. I mean, there's people who have even been on like Rogan's podcast a couple times, and then you never really hear from them again. So the point
Mm.
is, at the end of the day, one, it's not just about the people that you have on your podcast. You have to be on other people's. You have to kind of be like basically embed yourself in the industry. But then two, you have to actually give back, right? You have to actually provide. It's not just about making an appearance. You actually have to have information that keeps people there because people will then go to the channel based on the appearance, but they won't stick around unless they feel like they're continuing to get that information.
And the to your point about The Rock, the more disproportionately quote big name a guest is, and the people they draw in, you have to fundamentally remember people are coming in for that guest. And I think there are qualities that a host can foster. I mean, I think about people, I try to study people I think are doing really good jobs as podcast hosts. I like Chris Williamson of Modern Wisdom and the way he asks
Hmm.
questions. It's been very influential on me. And Chris has certainly built a pretty big brand around it. We mentioned Rogan and Tim Ferriss. These are the outliers, of course. There are other people who've done it. But Chris may be unique in that he has probably built his brand and following and what have you primarily as a podcaster. So, what are the qualities there as a podcaster that keeps people coming back? And I mean, again, if you're going to rely on guest-based stuff, it part of it is continuously having guests that people are interested in who deliver high value, have some brand name recognition in the context of the world that your niche. And but yes, let's flip it because there's also the other side. Sometimes I get today I had two of these people who email out looking to get people, the people they represent, guests on my podcast, and
Right.
whoever they are suggesting are not fits and they don't follow me and there's no relationship. So that's a hard no, right? Just not even interested. But I do get asked a fair bit, hey, can I come on your podcast? And someone might be like, hey, I got a really great story or what have you. Well, it's kind of like with the editors where everybody, I've been at the Olympia with my muscle and fitness editor, and people come up like, "How do I get featured in muscle and fitness?" It's like, but you can hear it. It's about what's in it for them, but you
Sure.
have to think what's in it for the audience, what's in it for the editor, and of course, the editor has a job, has to, you know, has limitations and bandwidth on what can actually go in that magazine, so it has to be really valuable. And if people want to get on the podcasts, I think they suffer from the illusion that, well, if I just get on the podcast, or if I just get on the stage at the conference, it's going to make me. And then it's going to drive followers my way, and then it's going to fill my business. And I can tell you, for all the conferences I've spoken at, it really hasn't put clients in my business. Local word of mouth and just doing your core business successfully is far and away the disproportionate driver. And yes, aggregation of appearing on podcasts has been valuable. I do think so. But one singular has never done anything. And then that
Sure.
one singular guest, like The Rock, the people would show up to listen to that, and then they would look and go, well, oh, the next guest is someone they've never heard of. They're gone.
Yep. Right. Exactly. So in tying in with the, just the long stretch here of podcasting, one of the things I wanted to mention, we discussed a little bit, is if you compare, and let's stick with like actual advice, like fitness advice, not
Mm,
necessarily like the podcast scene, but if you think back to
sure.
when you started the podcast, 2017, 2018, you've had hundreds of episodes, right? We've each had hundreds of guests at this point. what would you say were some of the biggest beliefs that in 2017, 18 you would have been pretty adamant about, and now you're either less adamant about or actually have completely changed your view on based on these conversations with experts in the industry?
It's funny because for quite a while, I've been plugged into the media of the quote experts that end up as guests, right? And I consider that to be the evidence-based nutrition and strength conditioning and training worlds. So I definitely don't have a strong sense of, wow, I've really done a 180 on anything since 2017. Now, if we go back to the start of my career, we're
Sure.
going into like 14 years ago, 15 years ago. I remember believing very strongly because it was a prevailing belief that meal timing and frequency mattered for staying lean, right? That, having carbs, and I don't think this is irrelevant, but it's so nowhere near as important as we used to believe it, that carbs before and after a workout, the kind of the anabolic window, whether the technical
Mhm.
30 minutes or the philosophy behind it, believe that this stuff was really important for body composition. And
Yeah.
now overwhelming evidence that is simply not a big thing, right? So that's one of the ones that comes to mind. I remember very early in my career reading the book Wheat Belly and thinking, oh my God, gluten bad, right? And I was
Yeah.
really caught up in this narrative very briefly, but then pretty quickly get onto your Lane Nortons and your other like your Alan Aragons and other like smart nutrition educated nutrition professionals, and you realize like no, this is an overblown narrative that we still see all the time, whether it's what's his name, the Canadian nephrologist, he's a big fasting guy, it's Jason Fung, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's sort of this denial of, and I mean, calories in, calories out, as far as thermodynamics go, it's technically true, but it's not particularly useful. It's sort of a paraphrase of something Stan Efferding says. So but people, and I understand why emotionally people get really caught up in these narratives, but I never bought into fast, like the extreme fasting stuff, right? But yeah, I remember some of these other things that turned out to be either archaic belief we moved away from or pure pseudoscience.
Yeah, no, it is interesting you say that because a few podcasts ago, and I might have even made a post about this where I said, do I believe that if somebody had the knowledge from, let's say, 10 years ago, so 2015 compared to 2025, the results would be that different? And my standpoint was no. And I had some people say, oh,
I agree.
no, it would be because they were saying, this was a belief and this was a belief. And I said, guys, I think you're just mixing up the dates. What you're talking about were beliefs were like 2000, 2002. Yes, from then there have been some dramatic revelations as far as like what's real, like you said, the meal frequency thing, a lot of this stuff. But honestly, I've obviously learned plenty, but I've learned more like granular details, maybe like the physiology behind something, mechanistically why this happens. But I really like, and again, I'm obviously somebody who talks to the fitness industry all the time. I don't think that if somebody came up in 2015 versus 25, the results are so different. Like we've known the core principles for a long time at this point.
I agree. And I'd be curious to see what your take is on this, but there are some major things that have societally changed. We have a dramatic rise in the use of social media and the engineering of social media, proliferation, a lot of this stuff. I think that especially the younger generation are going to be an interesting case where it's almost like, the hijacking of the dopamine driven system, attention, all that. And I think that due to the pace of this stuff and how rapidly it's changing, AI is going to be kind of an interesting thing. I think it leaves people at greater attention deficits. I'm not convinced. I think there's actually evidence to suggest that our attention spans have not shrunk the way we think. It's just, but yes, we do live in an environment where, technologically, whether it's Netflix and their algorithm or social media algorithms, they're engineered to hack our attention and keep us in places, right? So it's harder. So I actually think all that stuff and the pace of life makes things more challenging for the average person. And I suspect the average person probably feels busier and more burnt out than they did 15 to 25 years ago, which presents an obstacle, which kind of goes back to the whole thing about even cooking your own meals.
Mhm.
You know, I think there may be a meaningful difference in how hard that is for someone's time and mental energy in that time
Sure.
space, which then becomes a really big magnifier of either positive, healthy outcomes or progressively creeping negative metabolic health outcomes because of something like that. What do you think?
I think, well, the whole social media thing, and it's funny you say that because I do have it written down to talk about that at some point as well. But I do think that The I sometimes wonder if this is a change in society or a change in us individually, like me, like you and me, as we get busier. So obviously, everybody has their perspective on things individually as you get busier in life, right? So like, if I take 23-year-old me and how busy I was, which I was busy, but compared to 33-year-old me, who's even busier, I find it hard to even focus. And I don't think, oh, my attention span is gone. It's just there's so much stimulation. People have talked about
Mm.
how like it's harder to read a book. Peter T has said this. Like he can't sit down and just enjoy reading a book anymore. Say it's very difficult for me because I could be productive. I could be doing this other thing. To just stop everything and slowly read a book is very difficult. So again, I don't know how that speaks to like how we define attention span, but I will say it's certainly hard for me to focus on non-productive tasks.
There's something big there, and I struggle with this, and I really want to hear how you overcame this or work on this. There was at least a few years recently, I'm getting a lot better, but had to conscientiously do this, create boundary around time to do non-productive things. But that guilt, that creeping guilt that if I was not doing something that felt productive, then it interfered with my ability to sit down and enjoy a book, a video game that I like. But you know what I would find is mentally I would be a little bit cooked, and then I would end up catching myself doom scrolling. So now I've gone and done something that wasn't productive because I felt guilty about doing something else that wasn't technically productive yet would have been more restorative. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so you can anybody who's looking at the video can see me nodding along because I've said this to a number of friends where it's like, okay, I say I would like to do A, but I don't have time to do A. So in theory, I'll do like B, but in reality, you just end up wasting this time with this unproductive C. And it's like if I had just taken that same amount of time, A could have been done quickly, and then I could have moved on to B, So it's very difficult. I had this recently where I was doing like I was okay, I have to do this many minutes of like prehab rehab work because of this injury.
Mhm.
And I mean literally like we're like getting ready to go to bed and I'm doing it because it's like I could be reading, but oh that's not checking off something. This is checking off something. So if it's on my list, and I'm sure you've
Mm.
heard examples where people put stuff on a list that they know they're going to do for the productive feeling of checking it off the list, right? And to some degree, that has served me well because I tend to be hyper productive in that sense, and I'm always quote unquote achieving something. But the significant, I would say, significant downside of that is you're at a family gathering and you're like, you want to talk about your business because you're like, oh, look at these ideas. And it's something I'm still working on. I've definitely gotten better. I have actually cut back, like, I don't know if you know, so I'm a dentist. I still clinically work on patients and I have cut back with that. And that has given me some more free time. But I obviously still quote unquote struggle with it, and I could, in a sense, almost say there is a little bit of like a oh woe is me aspect here, right? It's like the person who goes to job interview. Well, my worst trait is I try too hard, right? Like we could come across as like sounding like that a little bit, like oh we're just so productive, but
Humble brag.
right, and
Humble
that's
brag.
really not how I mean it. It's a genuine thing to work on, I think, when you actually can't step back and just enjoy a movie or read a book and like you feel like you need to be on 24/7.
And it's a concept battle. It's funny you mentioned the being a doctor of dentistry. Do you know my friend Dr. Alan Bacon, who is a doctor of dentistry?
Yes, I do. I know he's been on the podcast.
Okay, good. I want to make sure because that would be interesting because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
funny because he may be one of the absolute best people at understanding research when it comes to nutrition and training, and yet his doctorate is in dentistry. And
Yes.
it's funny because by and large, I'm actually usually very wary of quote science communicators who wander outside of their area of expertise and talk about studies, what have you. But Alan is as good as they get.
Yeah.
But there are other popular ones who are like kind of dubious, but they sound really authoritative and that fools people. But that's a little
Sure,
bit of a
sure.
side quest.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't. I try to think if I have anything. I feel like just being a little more cognizant of the fact that creating time to enjoy things that I find restorative. And for me, this is an interesting thing. This come up recently. I'm in Edmonton, so therefore, as of time of recording, Edmonton Oilers are in the Stanley Cup Finals. Right? I don't know how many Americans give too much of a shit about hockey,
Yeah.
but you being, you know, if you're a Flyers fan, Then your Flyers didn't have such a great year, but they got rid of Tortorella, who's a clown, the coach, as far as I'm concerned. I'm a classically, I love the Pittsburgh Penguins, so like I really
Okay.
like Mario Lemieux and Sidney Crosby. So like, they'll plug into people who are in your geographic area. But I have a lot of clients who have been coming in and their just nervous systems are cooked because certainly the first round, the Oilers looked like they were done. And then they came back from some deficits and they scraped themselves through the first playoff round. At the same time, there was a Canadian election, which some people are very emotionally invested in. So these people, their nervous systems were just torched that week. But I have a boundary around sports. I can enjoy, like checking the scores or what have you. I try not to watch it live. I don't have the time for it really. I'd rather use other things for my time. But to have a disproportionate amount of my emotional well-being and my identity tied up in sports outcomes to me
Mhm.
sounds like nightmarish and toxic. So I discarded that a long time ago because, of course, the teams that I classically cheer for outside of like, I like the Chicago Bulls when I was a kid. Used to love basketball. Cool. They destroyed everybody. Great. But since then, the overwhelming majority of the sports teams that I like have been mediocre to abysmal. Therefore, that's just, it's the Chicago
Yeah.
Cubs long time suffering until they finally won a championship. That just isn't emotionally healthy for me. And I'm not saying that people can't get great joy out of sports, but sometimes you have to kind of look at the things that you've outsourced your identity to. And therefore your emotional state and well-being is disproportionately affected by an outcome completely beyond your control. And that's definitely true of like people who are like their identity is socio-political, which I just
Yeah. Yeah.
people who are like that tend to just be wired for victim mindset. I'm just like, I can't have that energy in my world. I'm sorry. No, I to turn that stuff off and people will be offended by this. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Fuck off. That's your bully narrative. Get fucked with that. That stuff just does not penetrate my world. I can't control it. Therefore, I'm going to focus my energy and effort. It's like you with this podcast, donate charitable donations, right? Like the people, one of my biggest pet peeves is these idiots, and they are idiots, who scream loudly on social media demanding that you share their opinion about whatever particular thing is going on in the world. Like until this is a real diatribe, but until about a generation and a half ago, you couldn't know in real time what was going on in a village across the world. You couldn't. We were not wired emotionally. Our nervous system wasn't designed to handle the inundation of real time horror of the world we live in at scale, right? The 24-hour news drip via social media and the people their particular pet outrage, which sometimes people are on different sides of a particular outrage. And this may risk sounding insensitive. That's not the point. These horrors are real. But if you drown your psyche in this to the point where your nervous system is so dysregulated, you can't function in your life and be a parent or effective in your job, or your metabolic health is ruined because at the end of the day you can't even bring yourself to go to the gym, you're helping no one, you're destroying your own health. And my argument is much more that focus on yourself first, focus on your family first, the immediate world around you, whether it's education, plug yourself into a fulfilling career, take care of your emotional well-being, your physical well-being. And then if you build capacity, you have the financial resources or the reach resources to good things in the world, and whether that's volunteering or donating to something charitable or helping the people in your immediate world, and you can scale that up, and that is the way that you can, because you can't change what the government halfway around the world or in another country is going to do yourself. And yelling about it on social media and then patting yourself on the back because you did a good thing, it's there's a term for this, but armchair activism. There's other terms that I like better, but I can't remember. But if you find yourself caught up in that all the time, then it becomes environment engineering, which goes into food in our immediate world.
Sure.
But it's also, what are we following? What are the social media platforms we are on, and curating that aggressively. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too much into like the politics of it, it's definitely
Yeah.
something that like again, the charity thing was something I had thought of from day one of the podcast because it was something that I mean, I was already donating to charity and it made it, I guess, almost like worth it in a way. Like I was like, okay, even if the podcast fails, this will be a good aspect of it. And what I do find is, I friends or not friends, people who maybe complain about, wealthy people the most, or they make
Mm,
these posts about certain things. But they've never donated to a charity in their life. And look, I'm not saying it specifically it's got to be charity. There are some charity organizations that are, nonsense. But they've never volunteered. Everything they buy is for themselves, or they're just wasteful purchases. And I'm like, like you said, it's like armchair activism. It's like you're like screaming about this or that thing, or how this is not fair, or that, these people need to pay more taxes or whatever it is, but you're not actually doing anything to help anybody personally. And I mean, and shoot, like even like with my, with my office, like I've given away and done free dental care far in excess of even what I've donated to actual charities. And that's something that I can have a local benefit to people, right? And I don't know, it's just sometimes it does bug me a little bit. Not that some people just don't have the resources. I understand that they don't have the resources to help, but usually you can help people in some way. And a lot of times these people who are the loudest don't do that at all.
And that's ultimately my pet peeve. And it's rooted in hypocrisy. It's like well, what's good for I want to control what you do, but I don't want to change me or my life. But I mean, again, this starts to get really deeply ideological. And
Sure.
as part of this, as I don't plug into this stuff, right? I'm just like, no, there's a boundary around this stuff for me. And my interest and my energy goes into things that I find fulfilling and the people that I enjoy.
Yep, yeah, for sure. I did want to say one thing that I had noticed with because I know you write for T Nation. Do you remember John Romaniello?
Yes.
I don't know what happened with him. I mean, so I used to read T Nation quite a bit from 2005 to
Mm.
maybe 2013 or 14, something like that. And I don't know how it is now. I know that back then, it's how I came across John Meadows, it's how I came across like a lot of those people back then. Christian Thibodeau, I think is how you say it. Like,
I was just in Montreal with Christian at an event. Christian's incredible.
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. He's
So,
great.
is he? Back then, at least, again, I just don't know how it is now. Back then, it was definitely a situation where, like, you go in one article by this guy said this, one article by this and
Mm.
this. I imagine that's just the case anywhere you have many different authors who are going to have different viewpoints on things.
Yes.
But I remember John Romaniello had an article titled "Are Your Cheat Days Cheaty Enough?" And these were the days when like people were pushing like bigger and bigger cheat days to stoke the metabolism and all these things like that. So just on the topic of things that have changed, I would say for me personally, I used to be a much stronger believer in the need for refeeds on a physiological level, whereas now I think there's benefits to them. There's probably a significant psychological benefit. But certainly I don't believe in like hey, this 10,000 calorie cheat day of junk food really helped you to lose more fat. And that was, again, not 5 or 10 years ago, but probably now like 15 years ago.
So there are two possible directions with this. So guide me as to what you want me to answer.
Sure.
The way that you started this, I'm going to choose my words very carefully. I have met John in person. His energy didn't sit great with me. Didn't click with him the way I have with many of the other T Nation writers that I've encountered. I will not make specific statements, but if someone wants to Google on Reddit, there have been a lot of allegations about
Oh, really?
behavior with him that came to light really recently. So he's not an individual that I associate with or want to have anything to do with. But like I said, I'll choose my words carefully. So there's some stuff there. Okay,
Gotcha.
he's largely fallen from grace in our industry, and he's persona non grata across
Mm,
most of it.
interesting.
So now, as far as the refeeds go, because I never operated as a coach in the competitive space, then never really got into programming nutrition in the classic way that bodybuilding prep has worked. So I think the way I've approached probably refeeds, I mean, physiologically, I do not believe the research supports that they have any additional benefit outside of just the calorie management. So I think what you alluded to is that psychological management is probably the key factor here.
Yeah.
I think if someone were to use refeeds classically, where there's, whether you call it cheat meal or whatever, where there's maybe unrestrained behavior for a meal or a day, especially if there's a, a tendency towards disordered eating behavior in the first place, then for that specific individual, we may actually be just sort of creating a socially acceptable narrative around, binge behavior. So we
Mhm.
kind of have to know what's the psychological makeup and dietary history of the person that we're working with. So that's important. Then it's like, if we're not tracking it, which I don't believe we have to track everything, I think it can be a valuable tool, and someone may be eating more calories than they need, then they may be, quote, undoing part of the period of time that they've been dieting for, depending on how many calories they were able to get into that session. So part of it is just dependent upon how many calories that person is eating and how it nets out across a time unit, probably a week or even a month. Now, on the psychological side, if someone's really struggling with the process of dieting, I'm a big proponent of getting them to really understand that this is a temporary thing and having a planned time frame. So if we're in a calorie deficit, I do like, and RP strength has been a major influence on me for this one. But I like planning 8 to 12 weeks of a modest calorie deficit, depending on the person, their goals, their tolerance to it, with a clear understanding and the reminder that we are planning to go back to maintenance. You cannot and we will not keep you in a perpetual deficit unless, and I have had success here where you have someone who is very overfat, who their calorie deficit, even just the behavior change of trying to cook healthier food and getting them more active, takes them out of the behavior that was getting them, progressively more obese, which was a lot of ultra processed food, maybe a lot of fast food, a lot of liquid calories, you're drinking a lot of pop, a lot of alcohol, etc. And even just the structure of bringing that in, it probably just takes them out of that surplus and may even get them into a bit of a deficit anyway. And it's not even emotionally or physically taxing. Well, guess what? And if they have a fairly large amount of weight to lose, they may actually be able to sustain that deficit for a very long time. It's also a moving target because as someone loses body weight, their metabolic their base metabolic rate goes down progressively a little bit. So after a while, eating the same amount of food may get them to lose weight, lose weight, lose weight until, oh, we're no longer losing weight because what was the deficit is now maintenance. Then we have to readjust. But outside of that, I find that most people, it's probably better off to have them very alert to the fact that we are planning to go back to maintenance for a period of time. And it could be something as simple as half the amount of time of the diet. And then they have the emotional break from it. And then we decide together when they're ready to do it again if there is more fat to lose. And that strategy as a long-term approach works well. I think one of the biggest things that gets people in trouble, and it's true of yo-yo dieting, but it's also true of contest preparation dieting, is once the planned phase is over or they can no longer sustain it, then it becomes unrestrained behavior back to the old ways. And then they end up in a fairly significant calorie surplus without guardrails for a
Or
longer period of time. And then they accumulate body fat. That's also why reverse dieting is popular. I mean, people have all this hubbub about reverse dieting. I think it's nuts to actually, after a competition diet's over, to keep someone in a deficit
oh,
for
sure.
longer because the body's in a stress state. It's nuts. It's fucking ludicrous. And then this idea that you can reverse people out and build their metabolism. I mean, as you increase calories, yes, there's a thermic effect of food, and as you increase body mass, your metabolic rate increases a bit. But I think some people got really carried away with the idea behind reverse dieting. It
Sure.
makes far more sense to me to what was happening was the reason why reverse dieting appeared to work is because it was putting some boundaries and some guardrails on people who otherwise were just massively overshooting and fantasizing about these piles of chocolate and cookies and whatever
Right.
garbage after the show. And then they kept doing this for, at least a week, if not longer, and never put any sort of guardrail back in again. And they went completely off the deep end.
Yeah, I think we're all glad that Lane Norton kind of walked back on that because obviously he, popularized a lot of that and was adding like, 5 grams of carbs and 2 grams of fat and all of that. But I think he doesn't advise that anymore. And at least most people in the evidence-based space, I believe, are much more on board now with like, hey, when you got super lean, let's get you back to a little bit more reasonable body fat. Let's get you out of the deficit at least, and then gradually go from there. I don't see too many people, maybe you do. I don't see too many people these days who advocate like the absurdly slow reverse diet, thankfully.
I think it's mostly gone away too. And, I definitely have seen some people who will, still believe in reversing people out. And they may have some reasonable justifications for it. And if it helps emotionally manage the athlete who is nervous about coming out into higher calorie territory because they have fear of fat gain, maybe it's the right thing for them psychologically, right? I'm
Yeah.
cool with that. But you, again, you have to know the individual and who you're managing. But I think reverse dieting, if done well, brings someone probably back to maintenance pretty fast, but has a good guardrail right there. And that's why it works,
Yeah.
not for the mechanisms that I think people for a very long time claimed it would.
Yeah, which is actually, I mean, that going back to the whole like, what used to be believed. I don't remember when reverse dieting was like at its peak popularity, maybe like early 2010s, like 12, something like that. But that is one where you had, and again, I'm not trying to hate on Lane. He's been on the podcast as well.
Love Lane. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. But just to say, he really was somebody who, obviously intelligent guy, very strongly believed, hey, we are getting these people to maintain on hundreds of calories above what they could have otherwise. And like, I mean, look, like that was his experience trying it out and maybe not realizing the alternative. But that might be a good example of something where, hey, like we've kind of all gone against what that belief
Oh,
was.
I suspect again what I said about the illusion that this is working because what was previously happening was people are just overshooting massively because there were no guardrails. There was
Right.
unrestrained binge behavior, whether clinically or otherwise, right? Uh, Lane was the spearhead of reverse dieting, the people immediately around him, and the spearhead for the idea behind metabolic damage. We also now know is not supported by the evidence. But
Right.
and I don't think Lane has moved with the times. I don't think, and I like him. I think he's one of my primary positive influences when it comes to evidence-based nutrition. Every person, including some of my favorite people in the industry, I think have their blind spots, and I think they kind of
Sure.
have their biases, and I think that's fair. And if we demonize or punish people for blind spots when they're the abundance of their overwhelming majority of their knowledge, belief, and what they share is actually really, really good and positive, I don't really give a shit. Um, I don't think he was necessarily like aggressive in going, "Hey, I was 100% wrong about this before, blah blah blah." But I've also not seen him in any meaningful way. He's definitely moved off of the metabolic damage thing. We've known for a long time that
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
did wasn't supported by evidence. So I find that he's pretty good about moving with the evidence. No one's
Yeah.
perfect. And as long as someone's willing to move with the evidence, whether they really quickly go, "Oh, no, I was wrong last week," or if they sort of softly and quietly adjust their positions over time, I don't give a shit. I'm fine as, but it's the people who get like rooted in an idea. Let's say you're Gary Taubes, who it's like just complete
Yeah.
denial of like calories in, calories out. Like everything is the carb insulin hypothesis, and then funds research
Yeah.
that basically debunks your own stuff. I think with Kevin Hall, if I'm correct on that, and then just like virtually ignoring it or weaving narratives to support your pre-existing belief system that you've written like 8 books around. Well, then all of a sudden this person is fundamentally not evidence-based and is unwilling to move off of their emotionally held belief system.
Yeah, 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 Fong and Taubes for sure.
Mm.
So I know we're coming up on time. One
We're,
last topic
we're
I
good
wanted
if you're
to.
good. I've got a little more, so we're good. So
Okay.
ask anything.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk. I just happened to see a clip that you had with Mike Israetel talking about AI in
Mm.
fitness and everything, and that's something that I'm increasingly interested in because I mean, literally a year ago. Obviously, I mean, I knew what ChatGPT was, but it wasn't like I was using it on a regular basis. And then I started using it more, and it just like for business reasons and things like that. And now I'm at the point where, dude, I go on Instagram, and I'm not a big social media consumer, but I will obviously have to get on the app to like post or anything like that. And I'm amazed at how much is just AI nonsense. And both from like photos and videos, I saw like a sponsored ad that popped up where I was like, this is just an AI person. I
Mm.
saw this is a silly example, but like Stu Phillips just posted a study on protein, and the picture, I think he seemed to believe it was real because he had posted in the comments, oh, like real picture. But the guy's fingers were getting lost in the rope. Like it was very clearly an AI photo.
Mm.
We could talk about the concern of certain generations maybe not being as aware of AI and like outside of fitness and all that too. But anyway, the point is, there are really positive things I can see coming from it, but also obvious significant negatives. So I'm just curious as a coach where your livelihood depends on writing and training and things like that. What do you think about AI like really going into the industry?
There's a lot here. I'm going to try to be really like surgical in places. Number one, I just happen to be reading The Coming Wave. I can't remember the author's name, but it's one of the more like, I don't want to say doomsday scenario, but one of like the more like scary, here's all the stuff, that society will change. So if someone's really interested in that, that's a good book to at least kind of look at from a broad overview. Okay, so the writing side first. Writing in the industry, I'm actually doing a presentation at CanFit Pros Global Conference in Toronto in August, and I'm going to talk about this a bit. The writing environment has changed dramatically. A lot of the publications have shifted their formats. T Nation has gone in internal community. Even their topics, they're really more focused on like men's hormonal health
Mm,
than they are like on a lot of the strength and conditioning stuff. For a while, publications, whether it's Barbend or On It, they at NT Nation have really gone into like almost more SEO based stuff, but even that won't be all that relevant once we get into AI based stuff. There are publications like Elite FTS where Dave Tate is still very, concerned with organic written material by real people, and I love that. There's another aspect to this that for a very long time, and you would have come through the industry at this time, I certainly did, where the traditional gatekeepers were the T Nations, the bodybuilding.coms, the other like media platforms. For anyone to be sort of noteworthy or known in the industry, you either had to be in certain networks writing for these publications, and the industry leader ranks were very much gatekept through that. Now, social media, someone who's very good with either really great evidence-based media and savvy video skills that can blow up and become a big authority. But at the same time, also people who walk through grocery store aisles and say that oatmeal or spinach is bad or yell at breakfast
right,
cereal.
right.
Those people can grow monstrous followings and they have authority in their space, right? So there's pros and cons, all these things. So, but the traditional by the gatekeepers of the writing world have been bypassed. Now, I think there's still quite a lot of credibility for actually writing for those things. There's more limited opportunities. And certainly, what you alluded to, both on social media and in other media forms, we are probably going to see a massive upsurge in AI generated content because it can be created a lot faster. And so I think for coaches, and this is the next thing that's really relevant, is if you want to stand out in the industry and be successful, I don't think AI is going to change. It'll change the industry. I don't think it's going to take most of the jobs. I think the coaches who are trying to do a very specific thing, the coaches who are always the quote, whatever, 85% that are, fall out in a year, their same shit's going to happen. And the ratios will always be there. But there's another group of coaches, and I've gone to the conferences and I know some of the business mentors, and some of them are great and some of them are not. But there's this worshiping at the altar of scale where trainers are told you have to scale your online business, your seven-figure business, your this, that, whatever. They don't really talk about the fact that there's seven-figure overhead, seven-figure stress, all this stuff. I've said this in a lot of media if anyone's heard me say it before. But it's a bit of a house of cards. And I think there's a lot of coaches who they're not necessarily the experienced in-person coaches, but more the ones that come out of maybe the influencer world, the competitive world, and they want to go straight into online, but then they want to automate, systemize, and scale themselves and their businesses. But what they really want to do is they want to automate, systemize, and scale themselves out of interacting with real people. This is going to fail, right? And I think some of the business mentors are promising this, and they think they can charge very high ticket prices for not a lot of interpersonal relationship. And guess what? A lot of companies, and I'll use RP Strength, again, my sponsor, but their Hypertrophy app, their Diet Coach app are good examples of this. These are good, really good apps and programs that are low cost that deliver a very hands-off coaching experience and directive for fairly independent people. So why the fuck on earth would someone pay 5 grand for 3 months of something that's fairly similar when they can do one of these apps for, $10 or $20 a month or whatever it is, right? And there's going to be even a lot of free resources out there. So the coaches who are trying to do this are going to get crushed. They're going to get just swept out of the industry because again, we go back to Mike Isertel, the face and figurehead, the brains behind a lot of what's going on at RP, who's obsessed with and talking about AI all the time. And they have the resources and they're way ahead on that particular thing. You think they're not going to use this better? They're going to know how to use this to build something that will actually draw people in.
Yeah.
So the coaches who want to be successful in this industry, you're not going to beat RP at that particular game with high ticket and low time with people. You have to go the other way. You actually have to lean into high touch point. Now, it's not to create a lot of friction for the people who just want support, but it's your clients to know that you're there, that you'll respond reasonably promptly when they need and with actual personal stuff. And what scares me is I think some coaches are going to, I mean, we're already seeing a lot of DM automation, which I think can be used smartly, but I think it's going to be misused aggressively. But when people start trying to, and the technology will be there, have AI create video with their voice to respond to fool people into thinking it's really them
Hmm.
via text, voice, video messaging, now we've got a problem. And it just tells me the coach is in it for the wrong reasons, right? And it's like, if this is really the way you want to do it, you don't belong in this world. And to me, that's just straight up unethical. I don't give a shit, right? If you're not being transparent, if you're transparent about the fact that this is a bot that is responding quickly to try to be really helpful, and then you get around and you're like a real person, different story, right? So there's going to be misuse of this stuff, but fundamentally where it's at, I am still a full-time in-person personal trainer, and the clients that come in, they love the experience, and that will always be there. And I think you can do it well online with voice and video-based message and just keep the relationship high, but also if people trust that you're there when you need them.
Yeah, I think the in-person stuff, is going to be safe for a while. I will say I'm glad that, my profession is basically like surgical and manual, right? So like at least for a while I'm safe. But there are certain professions where I'd be like, man, I'd be really concerned right now. Like if you're a plumber, you should be thankful right now that like that's not going to AI anytime soon. But I even wonder just, are the DMs or like the videos going to be almost undetectable in a couple of years? I
They
mean,
will
I
be.
don't, I don't know,
They
it's
will be. They will be. And people will use them. And I think then humans are smart. I mean, our brains are pattern recognition machines. They are, right? That is the what you bring to your work. You can look in someone's mouth and see things. Your brain perceives things at a subconscious level that you have expertise in and interest in
sure.
and have done for years before you consciously are aware of it. You just kind of know something and you think and like something's not right, and then you see it. We see that with coaching, the way people move. Anybody with expertise in their specific thing, it's like you have a sixth sense. That is pattern recognition going constantly beneath the surface. People, if they pay enough attention to the people that they follow and like, they're still going to go, there's something not right about it. It'll fool a lot of people, but a lot of people will kind of know better. And I still believe there is always opportunity for the real human being. And here's a big thing. Anybody who's had a head start, who's already been doing it for a long time, and people are used to that, then that relationship equity is going to be very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting to see, what's going to happen in the next couple of years. I think you're right that the human element and touch point are going to be more valued than ever. Obviously, I don't know the answer. I know Mike, like you said, constantly talks about AI. He's very, very pro AI, and I'm very pro technology and advancements, of course. But yeah, it is a little bit of a question mark of specifically where it will end up.
Well, I for one welcome our, AI robot overlords. know, um,
On
I
record,
sometimes
right?
I sometimes laugh and think about I don't really believe this, but sometimes I think maybe we just already live in the Matrix in a simulation because the events of the last think 10 to 12 years are just don't make any sense, both on a
Sure.
worldwide scale and I was having this conversation with someone recently, like just in my own life and career, I'm like, how in the hell? I feel like a turtle on the top of a fence post sometimes. Like, how in the hell did I end up writing for all these publications that I read for years? I mean, I've written for Arnold Schwarzenegger's email newsletter. Like, how the fuck does that happen, right? That's
Yeah, yeah,
crazy to me.
cool.
Speaking at some of these things, and so I kind of look around. I'm like, I'm a full-time personal trainer at heart, at my core, and somehow these sort of things happened. And I understand it, I do, but to me, it's almost evidence that I remember when we watched the movie The Matrix, and they talk about how like what is it, the late '90s were like the kind of ideal time in human history, and everybody kind of was like, oh, you, that's ridiculous. And then now we look back and we go, I think they kind of had that one right a little bit, right? It was a simpler time, and
Sure,
I
sure.
part of me thinks like, hey, we'd be better off if we just kind of lived perpetually in that time frame and not facing the existential threat of what AI could be and how much it's going to change our lives.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we'll see, man. So where can people find your stuff? Obviously, prolific writer, but where can people go specifically?
What's funny is I'm not necessarily that prolific with the writing. I've written in a lot of places, but given the fact I'm so full time, and so my podcast right now, the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast, has been my focus outside of my coaching. And that's been a really fun playground to have great guests on. And I'm going to be doing that for the long foreseeable future and, see what I can do with it. But I try to leverage the writing very strategically. I'm trying to get a few pieces out for my website in the near future. I want to focus more on that. So www.andrewcoatesfitness.com. But all roads go through Instagram. So it's Andrew Coates Fitness on Instagram. That you can message me. So in the theme of what we're talking about, if anybody messages me, I will respond with a voice message. It will be me. It's not going to be AI generated. And I like that. I like those kind of touch points. And it surprises people. Very, very few people with and again, people attribute a lot to numbers of followers, but I've heard this a lot. There's almost no one who has my scale of Instagram following who responds that way. But I do. It's like anybody who messages me, I'm going to respond to it. It's important to me. And that's actually led to, I mean, sometimes it's taken people a few years, and it's not because I expect a payoff at the end. But a lot of people have turned around and asked me to coach them because I've always responded. I've answered their questions. I'm just present there. And it's something that I enjoy and I'm fulfilled by. So I try to use the platform in a positive way. I try to have my own guardrails around how much time I spend on scrolling because I want to use my time to actually like interact with the people who are kind enough to interact with me. So, Dave, thanks for having me on. This was a fun conversation. And I hope everybody listens. You know what? I'll say one more thing. Two things. One, for your listeners, chances are there have been people who have been here a while and they love this and they tune in all the time. But have you actually given Dave a review yet? If you haven't, you know what? And again, you're driving. I know, get it. Like, okay, just whatever. Make a note, make a voice note, but go do it. It takes a few seconds. And this is the sort of thing that gives back because
Always
Dave's not charging you guys to listen to this. And two, if you're someone who has found this podcast through my media, then, well, Dave's had some pretty big guests on there. Mike Israel's been on there. I've never had Lane Norton on mine. He was always one of the ones I wanted to have. And he even agreed years ago, but just Lane now is so busy, it's probably unlikely. But, you've had mega A-lister guests across the industry, and I'm honored to be, even a part of that now. But go scroll through what Dave's had on for previous episodes. You may find some other episodes you enjoy. Stick around. So thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it, Andrew. And I will confirm our first Instagram interaction. I just went back and looked, and it was a voice message from you. So I can confirm that that is how you respond to things.
Absolutely.
Cool, cool. All right, links down below for all of Andrew's stuff, and thanks for tuning in, guys.